Tynan Portillo presents, featuring the best horror stories of the 19th century. Welcome to the Poe Show Podcast. Narrated by Tynan Portillo. Welcome back for part 3 of the Dunwich Horror, featuring That Was Horrorble. Friday morning, Armitage, Rice, and Morgan set out by motor for Dunwich, arriving at the village about 1 in the afternoon. The day was pleasant, but even in the brightest sunlight, a kind of quiet dread and portent seemed to hover about the strangely domed hills and the deep, shadowy ravines of the stricken region. Now and then on some mountaintop, a gaunt circle of stones could be glimpsed against the sky. From the air of hushed fright at Osborne's store, they knew something hideous had happened, and soon learned of the annihilation of the Elmer Fry house and family. Throughout that afternoon, they rode around Dunwich, questioning the natives concerning all that had occurred, and seeing for themselves with rising pangs of horror the drear Fry ruins, with their lingering traces of the tarry stickiness, the blasphemous tracks in the Fry yard, the wounded Seth Bishop cattle, and the enormous swaths of disturbed vegetation in various places. The trail up and down Sentinel Hill seemed to Armitage of almost cataclysmic significance, and he looked long at the sinister altar-like stone on the summit. At length, the visitors, apprised of a party of state police which had come from Aylesbury that morning, in response to the first telephone reports of the Fry tragedy, decided to seek out the officers and compare notes as far as practicable. This, however, they found more easily planned than performed, since no sign of the party could be found in any direction. There had been 5 of them in a car, but now the car stood empty near the ruins in the Fry yard. The natives, all of whom had talked with the policemen, seemed at first as perplexed as Armitage and his companions. Then old Sam Hutchins thought of something and turned pale. Nudging Fred Farr and pointing to the dank, deep hollow that yawned close by.
God!
He gasped.
I told him not to go down into the glen, and I never thought nobody'd do it in them tracks and that smell and them whippoorwills a-screeching down there in the dark of noonday.
A cold shudder ran through the natives and visitors alike, and every ear seemed strained in a kind of instinctive, unconscious listening. Armitage, now that he had actually come upon the horror and its monstrous work, trembled with the responsibility he felt to be his. Night would soon fall, and it was then that the mountainous blasphemy lumbered upon its eldritch course. Negotium perambulant in tenebri. The old librarian rehearsed the formulae he had memorized and clutched the paper containing the alternative one he had not memorized. Rice, beside him, took from a valise a metal sprayer of the sort used in combating insects, whilst Morgan uncased the big game rifle on which he relied, despite his colleagues' warnings that no material weapon would be of help. Armitage, having read the hideous diary, knew painfully well what kind of a manifestation to expect, but he did not add to the fright of the Dunwich people by giving any hints or clues. He hoped that it might be conquered without any revelation to the world of the monstrous thing it had escaped. As the shadows gathered, the natives commenced to disperse homeward, anxious to bar themselves indoors, despite the present evidence that all human locks and bolts were useless before a force that could bend trees and crush houses when it chose. They shook their heads at the visitors' plan to stand guard at the Fry ruins near the glen, and as they left, had little expectancy of ever seeing the watchers again. There were rumblings under the hills that night, and the whippoorwills piped threateningly. Once in a while, a wind, sweeping up out of Cold Spring Glen, would bring a touch of ineffable fetor to the heavy night air. such a fetor as all three of the watchers had smelled once before when they stood above a dying thing that had passed for 15 years and a half as a human being. But the looked-for terror did not appear. Whatever was down there in the glen was biding its time, and Armitage told his colleagues it would be suicidal to try to attack it in the dark. Morning came wanly, and the night sounds ceased. It was a gray, bleak day, with now and then a drizzle of rain, and heavier clouds seemed to be piling themselves up beyond the hills to the northwest. The men from Arkham were undecided what to do. Seeking shelter from the increasing rainfall beneath one of the few undestroyed Fry outbuildings, they debated the wisdom of waiting or of taking the aggressive and going down into the glen in quest of their nameless, monstrous quarry. The downpour waxed in heaviness, and distant peals of thunder sounded from far horizons. Sheet lightning shimmered, and then a forky bolt flashed near at hand, as if descending into the accursed glen itself. The sky grew very dark, and the watchers hoped that the storm would prove a short, sharp one, followed by clear weather. It was still gruesomely dark when, not much over an hour later, a confused babble of voices sounded down the road. Another moment brought to view a frightened group of more than a dozen men, running, shouting, and even whimpering hysterically. Someone in the lead began sobbing out words, and the Arkham men started violently when those words developed a coherent form.
Oh my God, my God!
The voice choked out.
It's going again, and this time by day. It's out and a-moving this very minute, and only the Lord knows when it'll be on us all.
The speaker panted into silence, but another took up his message.
Well, nigh an hour ago, Zeb Whaley was here. He heard a phone ringing, and it was Miss Corey, George's wife, that lives down by the junction. She said she hired the boy that Luther was about driving in the cows from the storms after the big bowl when he sees all the trees abandoned in the mouth of the glen opposite side her this, and smelt the same awful smell like he smelt when he found the big tracks last Monday morning. And he says they be swashing, lapping sound, more nor what the bending trees and bushes could make, and all on a sudden the trees among the rud began to get pushed aside. Oh, and they was an awful stomping and splashing in the mud. But mind ye, Luther didn't see nothing at all, only just the bending trees and underbrush. Then fur ahead where Bishop's Brook goes under the road, he heard an awful creature kicking and straining on the bridge, and says he could tell the sound of wood a starting to crack and split. And all the whiles he never see a thing, only them trees and bushes a bending. And when the wish-wishing sound got very far off, on the road towards Wizard Whately's and Sentinel Hill, Luther, he had the guts to step up, and he heard it first and looked at the ground. It was all mud and water. The sky was dark, and the rain was wiping about all the tracks about as fast as could be. But beginning at the glen mouth, where the trees had moved, there was still some of their awful prints as big as bars like he had seen on Monday.
At this point, the first excited speaker interrupted.
But that ain't the trouble now. That was only the start. Zeb here was calling folks up, and everybody was listening when a call from Seth Bishop's cut in. His housekeeper Sally was carrying on fit to kill. She just seen the trees abandoned beside the road and says there was a kind of mushy sound, like an elephant puffing and treading, heading for the house. Then she spoke sudden of a fearful smell and says her boy Chancey was screaming as how it was just like when he smelt up at the Whately's ruins Monday morning, and the dogs was all barking and whining awful. And then she let out a terrible yell, and says the shed down the road was just caved in like a storm and blowed it over, only the wind wasn't strong enough to do that. Everybody was listening, and we could hear lots of folks on the wire gasping. Sally yelled again, says the front yard picket fence had just crumbled up, though there wasn't no sign of what had done it. Then everybody on the line could hear Chancey and old Seth Bishop yelling too, and Sally was shrieking out that something heavy had struck the house. Not lightning or nothing, but something heavy again the front. That kept launching itself again and again, though you couldn't see nothing out the front windows. And then...
Lines of fright deepened on every face, and Armitage, shaken as he was, had barely poise enough to prompt the speaker.
And then Sally, she yelled out, "Oh, help, the house is caving in!" And on the wire we could hear a terrible crashing and a whole flock of screaming. Then like when Elmer Fry's place was took, only worse.
The man paused, and another of the crowd spoke. That's all. Not a sound nor squeak over the phone after that, just still like. We that heard it got out forwards and wagons and rounded up as many able-bodied menfolk as we could get at Quarry's place and come up here to see what you thought best to do. Not but what I think it's the Lord's judgment for our iniquities that no mortal kin ever set aside. Armitage saw that the time for positive actions had come and spoke decisively to the faltering group of frightened rustics. We must follow it, boys. He made his voice as reassuring as possible. I believe there's a chance of putting it out of business. You men know that those Whateleys were wizards. Well, this thing is a thing of wizardry, and must be put down by the same means. I've seen Wilbur Whately's diary, and read some of the strange old books he used to read. And I think I know the right kind of spell to recite to make the thing fade away. Of course, one can't be sure, but we can always take a chance. It's invisible. I knew it would be, but there's a powder in this long-distance sprayer that might make it shoo up for a second. Later on, we'll try it. It's a frightful thing to have alive, but it isn't as bad as what Wilbur would have let in if he'd lived longer. You will never know what the world has escaped. Now we've only this one thing to fight, and it can't multiply. It can, though, do a lot of harm. So we mustn't hesitate to rid the community of it. We must follow it. And the way to begin is to go to the place that has just been wrecked. Let somebody lead the way. I don't know your roads very well, but I've an idea there might be a shorter cut across lots. How about it? The men shuffled about a moment, and then Earl Sawyer spoke softly, pointing with a grimy finger through the steadily lessening rain.
I guess ye can get to Seth's Bishop's quickest by cutting across the lower meadow here, wading the brook at the low pace, and climbing through Carrier's mowing and the timber lot beyond. That comes out on the upper road, mighty nigh Seth's, a little on the other side.
Armitage, with Rice and Morgan, started to walk in the direction indicated, and most of the natives followed slowly. The sky was growing lighter, and there were signs that the storm had worn itself away. When Armitage inadvertently took a wrong direction, Joe Osborne warned him and walked ahead to shoo the right one. Courage and confidence were mounting, though the twilight of the almost perpendicular wooded hill which lay toward the end of their shortcut, and among those fantastic ancient trees they had to scramble as if up a ladder, put these qualities to a severe test. At length they emerged on a muddy road to find the sun coming out. They were a little beyond the Seth Bishop place, but bent trees and hideously unmistakable tracks shewed what had passed by. Only a few moments were consumed in surveying the ruins just around the bend. It was the Fry incident all over again, and nothing dead or living was found in either of the collapsed shells which had been the Bishop house and barn. No one cared to remain there amidst the stench and tarry stickiness, but all turned instinctively to the line of horrible prints leading on toward the wrecked Whately farmhouse and the altar-crowned slopes of Sentinel Hill. As the men passed the site of Wilbur Whately's abode, they shuddered visibly and seemed again to mix hesitancy with their zeal. It was no joke tracking down something as big as a house that no one could see, but that had all the vicious malevolence of a demon. Opposite the base of Sentinel Hill, the tracks left the road, and there was a fresh bending and matting visible along the broad swath marking the monster's former route to and from the summit. Armitage produced a pocket telescope of considerable power and scanned the steep green side of the hill. Then he handed the instrument to Morgan, whose sight was keener. After a moment of gazing, Morgan cried out sharply, passing the glass to Earl Sawyer and indicating a certain spot on the slope with his finger. Sawyer, as clumsy as most non-users of optical devices are, fumbled a while, but eventually focused the lenses with Armitage's aid. When he did so, his cry was less restrained than Morgan's had been.
God almighty, the grass and bushes is a-moving. It's a-going up, slow-like, creeping up to the top this minute. Heaven only knows what fur.
Then the germ of panic seemed to spread among the seekers. It was one thing to chase the nameless entity, but quite another to find it. Spells might be all right, but suppose they weren't. Voices began questioning Armitage about what he knew of the thing, and no reply seemed quite to satisfy. Everyone seemed to feel himself in close proximity to phases of nature and of being utterly forbidden and wholly outside the same experience of mankind.
In the end, the three men from Arkham, old, white-bearded Dr. Armitage, stocky, iron-gray Professor Rice, and lean, youngish Dr. Morgan, ascended the mountain alone. After much patient instruction regarding its focusing and use, they left the telescope with the frightened group that remained in the road, and as they climbed, they were watched closely by those among whom the glass was passed around. It was hard going, and Armitage had to be helped more than once. High above the toiling group, the great swath trembled as its hellish maker repassed with snail-like deliberateness. Then it was obvious that the pursuers were gaining. Curtis Whately, of the undecayed branch, was holding the telescope when the Arkham party detoured radically from the swath. He told the crowd that the men were evidently trying to get to a subordinate peak which overlooked the swath at a point considerably ahead of where the shrubbery was now bending. This, indeed, proved to be true, and the party were seen to gain the minor elevation only a short time after the invisible blasphemy had passed it. Then, Wesley Corey, who had taken the glass, cried out that Armitage was adjusting the sprayers which Rice held, and that something must be about to happen. The crowd stirred uneasily, recalling that the sprayer was expected to give the unseen horror a moment of visibility. 2 or 3 men shut their eyes, but Curtis Whately snatched back the telescope and strained his vision to the utmost. He saw that Rice, from the party's point of vantage above and behind the entity, had an excellent chance of spreading the potent powder with marvelous effect. Those without the telescope saw only an instant's flash of gray cloud, a cloud about the size of a moderately large building, near the top of the mountain. Curtis, who had held the instrument, dropped it with a piercing shriek into the ankle-deep mud of the road. He reeled, and would have crumpled to the ground had not 2 or 3 others seized and steadied him. All he could do was moan, half inaudibly.
Oh, great God. That.
There was a pandemonium of questioning, and only Henry Wheeler thought to rescue the fallen telescope and wipe it clean of mud. Curtis was past all coherence, and even isolated replies were almost too much for him.
Bigger than a barn. All made of squirming ropes. Whole thing sort of shaped like a hen's egg. Bigger than anything. With dozens of legs. Like hogs' heads that half shut up when they step. Nothing solid about it. All like jelly, and made of separate wriggling ropes pushed close together. Great bulging eyes all over it. 10 or 20 mouths or trunks sticking out all along the sides, as big as stovepipes, and all tossing and opening and shutting, all gray, with kind of blue or purple rings. And God in heaven, that half face on top.
This final memory, whatever it was, proved too much for poor Curtis, and he collapsed completely before he could say more. Fred Farr and Will Hutchins carried him to the roadside and laid him on the damp grass. Henry Wheeler, trembling, turned the rescued telescope on the mountain to see what he might. Through the lenses were discernible 3 tiny figures, apparently running toward the summit as fast as the steep incline allowed. Only these, nothing more.
Then everyone noticed a strangely unseasonable noise in the deep valley behind, and even in the underbrush of Sentinel Hill itself. It was the piping of unnumbered whippoorwills, and in their shrill chorus there seemed to lurk a note of tense and evil expectancy. Earl Sawyer now took the telescope and reported the three figures as standing on the topmost ridge, virtually level with the altar stone but at a considerable distance from it. One figure, he said, seemed to be raising its hands above its head at rhythmic intervals, and as Sawyer mentioned the circumstance, the crowd seemed to hear a faint, half-musical sound from the distance, as if a loud chant were accompanying the gestures. The weird silhouette on that remote peak must have been a spectacle of infinite grotesqueness and impressiveness, but no observer was in a mood for the aesthetic appreciation.
"I guess he's saying a spell,"
whispered Wheeler as he snatched back the telescope. The whippoorwills were piping wildly, and in a singularly curious, irregular rhythm quite unlike that of the visible ritual. Suddenly, the sunshine seemed to lessen without the intervention of any discernible cloud. It was a very peculiar phenomenon, and was plainly marked by all. A rumbling sound seemed brewing beneath the hills, mixed strangely with a concordant rumbling which clearly came from the sky. Lightning flashed aloft, and the wondering crowd looked in vain for the portents of storm. The chanting of the men from Arkham now became unmistakable, and Wheeler saw through the glass that they were all raising their arms in the rhythmic incantation. From some farmhouse far away came the frantic barkings of dogs. The change in the quality of the daylight increased, and the crowd gazed about the horizon in wonder. A purplish darkness, born of nothing more than a spectral deepening of the sky's blue, pressed down upon the rumbling hills. Then the lightning flashed again, somewhat brighter than before, and the crowd fancied that it had showed a certain mistiness around the altar stone on the distant height. No one, however, had been using the telescope at that instant. The whippoorwills continued their irregular pulsation, and the men of Dunwich braced themselves tensely against some imponderable menace with which the atmosphere seemed surcharged. Without warning came those deep, cracked, raucous vocal sounds which will never leave the memory of the stricken group who had heard them. Not from any human throat were they born, for the organs of man can yield no such acoustic perversions. Rather would one have said they came from the pit itself, had not their source been so unmistakably the altar stone on the peak. It is almost erroneous to call them sounds at all, since so much of their ghastly infra-bass timbre spoke to dim seats of consciousness and terror far subtler than the ear. Yet one must do so, since their form was indisputably, though vaguely, that of half-articulate words. They were loud as the rumblings and the thunder above which they echoed, yet did they come from no visible being. And because imagination might suggest a conjectural source in the world of non-visible beings, the huddled crowd at the mountain's base huddled still closer and winced as if in expectation of a blow. Rang the hideous croaking out of space. The speaking impulse seemed to falter here, as if some frightful psychic struggle were going on. Henry Wheeler strained his eye at the telescope, but saw only the three grotesquely silhouetted human figures on the peak, all moving their arms furiously, in strange gestures as their incantation drew near its culmination. From what black wells of acherotic fear or feeling, from what unplumbed gulfs of extra-cosmic consciousness or obscure, long-latent heredity were those half-articulate thunder croakings drawn? Presently they began to gather renewed force and coherence as they grew in stark, utter, ultimate frenzy. But that was all. The pallid group in the road, still reeling from the indisputably English syllables that had poured thickly and thunderously down from the frantic vacancy beside that shocking altar stone, were never to hear such syllables again. Instead, they jumped violently at the terrific report which seemed to rend the hills, the deafening, cataclysmic peal whose source, be it inner earth or sky, no hearer was ever able to place. A single lightning bolt shot from the purple zenith to the altar stone, and a great tidal wave of viewless force and indescribable stench swept down from the hill to all the countryside. Trees, grass, and underbrush were whipped into a fury, and the frightened crowd at the mountain's base, weakened by the lethal fetter that seemed about to asphyxiate them, were almost hurled off their feet. Dogs howled from the distance. Green grass and foliage wilted to a curious, sickly yellow-gray, and over field and forest were scattered the bodies of dead whippoorwills. The stench left quickly, but the vegetation never came right again. To this day, there is something queer and unholy about the growths on and around that fearsome hill. Curtis Whately was only just regaining consciousness when the Arkham men came slowly down the mountain in the beams of sunlight, once more brilliant and untainted. They were grave and quiet, and seemed shaken by memories and reflections even more terrible than those which had reduced the group of natives to a state of cowed quivering. In reply to a jumble of questions, they only shook their heads and reaffirmed one vital fact.
The thing has gone forever.
Armitage said.
It has been split up into what it was originally made of, and can never exist again. It was an impossibility in a normal world. Only the least fraction was really matter in any sense we know. It was like its father, and most of it has gone back to him in some vague realm or dimension outside our material universe. Some vague abyss out of which only the most accursed rites of human blasphemy could ever have called him for a moment on the hills.
There was a brief silence, and in that pause the scattered senses of poor Curtis Whately began to knit back into a sort of continuity, so that he put his hands to his head with a moan. Memory seemed to pick itself up where it had left off, and the horror of the sight that had prostrated him burst in upon him again.
Oh my God. That half face on top of it. That face with the red eyes and crinkly albino hair and no chin, like the Whateleys. It was a octopus, centipede, spider kind of thing, but they was a half-shaped man's face on top of it, and it looked like Wizard Whately's, only it was yards and yards across.
He paused, exhausted, as the whole group of natives stared in a bewilderment not quite crystallized into fresh horror. Only old Zebulon Whately, who wanderingly remembered ancient things but who had been silent heretofore, spoke aloud.
15 year gone. I heard old Whately say as how someday we'd hear a child of Lavinia's a-calling its father's name on top of Sentinel Hill.
But Joe Osborne interrupted him to question the Arkham men anew.
What was it anyhow? And however did young Wizard Whately call it out of the air it come from?
Armitage chose his words very carefully.
It was mostly a kind of force that doesn't belong in our part of space. A kind of force that acts and grows and shapes itself by other laws than those of our sort of nature. We have no business calling in such things from outside, and only very wicked people and very wicked cults ever try to. There was some of it in Wilbur Whately himself, enough to make a devil and a precocious monster of him, and to make his passing out a pretty terrible sight. I'm going to burn his accursed diary, and if you men are wise, you'll dynamite that altar stone up there, and pull down all the rings of standing stones on the other hills. Things like that brought down the beings those Whateleys were fond of. The beings they were going to let in tangibly to wipe out the human race, and drag the earth off to some nameless place for some nameless purpose. But as to this thing we've just sent back, the Whateleys raised it for a terrible part in the doings that were to come. It grew fast and big from the same reason that Wilbur grew fast and big. But it beat him because it had a greater share of the outsideness in it. You needn't ask how Wilbur called it out of the air. He didn't call it out. It was his twin brother, but it looked more like the father than he did. All right, I'm going to start now. I don't know how to start.
Listen, from two podcasters to another podcaster, the hardest thing is to do things, to
Right.
start them.
If you want to do a cold open, all you got to do is make a bit. So all
Make
you
a
got to do
bit.
is make a
All
joke.
right.
Thing is, it's in the middle of your episode, so cold middle.
Like cold cuts?
Yeah,
what-
like sandwiches. So like imagine the juiciest piece of beef you've ever seen in your life.
Okay.
Put it in
I'm
the
a steak
middle of-
guy.
You're a what guy?
I'm a steak guy. I
He's
love
a
steak.
guy. Okay,
So there's steak in the
so
sandwich.
it's a steak sandwich. Okay, now put that in the middle of two waveforms.
Imagine,
doing
if
that.
you will, a steak sandwich.
So I should start with.
There it is.
That's
Yep.
it,
And
that's
then you
it.
put it in the
sizzling.
butter
He's
and it
put it
goes.
in the butter.
He's doing it. Wow.
But the pan was a
Oh,
little hot.
what if we started out with an ASMR episode and it's just.
That'd be really good. I have a question.
Yeah.
Are we going right now? Or is
Yeah, I think we're going right
Sweet,
now.
That's awesome. Hey, thanks for having us.
I think this will be the opening.
That's pretty good.
Well, welcome, Derek and Isaac, from the That Was Horrorble podcast. Listeners, if you have not heard anything from them, they are from That Was Horrorble, and their podcast is absolutely brilliant. They review rotten horror movies. You say there's no such thing as a bad horror movie. So they review everything on Rotten Tomatoes that just falls underneath the mark.
It's if it's not fresh.
Yeah,
Exactly
yeah.
right. We take the lower end of the spectrum of
Yeah.
Rotten Tomatoes ratings like that, and
Yeah.
we got to find the better words that aren't bad horror movies.
There's nothing bad. It's just like horror stories. There's no bad horror story. It's just some of them are not enjoyed as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Or not produced as well.
Yeah, and they are two of the funniest guys I've ever heard.
Well, that's just-
they
that's just rude.
have so many wonderful bits. And actually, okay, I should have done this before we started.
I'm so nervous.
What'd you do?
I'm so nervous.
I know you guys already have some, but me and my wife also made you guys some friendship
Oh
bracelets.
my
We have
gosh. Taylor
friendship
Swift has
bracelets.
risen up again.
To describe to you lovely folks at
Oh,
home, this
my
is like
goodness.
a golden friendship
beautiful.
bracelet.
I hit
There's
the microphone.
It's so pretty. There's a star. There's stars in it.
I hope they
You-
fit.
This is incredible.
It doesn't matter
Thank
if it
you
doesn't
so
fit
much
because I'm going to
This is
stretch
wonderful.
I was just thinking like, oh, how many things can I reference to your podcast? And there's going to be a lot of things in this
do
episode
it.
that you're like, what the heck is going on? You got to go and visit That Was Horrible, and you got to listen to their
it. Yeah,
episodes.
go check us out.
Yeah. In fact, this episode for the Poe Show was inspired by their episode. Check out the title. Shut Up and Take My Mice. Okay, look for that episode. Because that's where they review the Dunwich Horror, which
Yeah.
was a movie that came out in the 1970s or something like
Yeah,
that.
I
I
think
think it was literally 1970.
70.
The big one.
That's when it happened. And I listened to that episode, and suddenly I was just like, oh my gosh, I got to invite them on to narrate.
It's a perfect merging of two worlds, you know. Like
Yeah.
the door was wide open, and thank you, Tynan, for inviting us to do this in this perfect window we had here. Right?
It was literally a match made in heaven. When I was reading your message or listening to your message about it, I was like, "This is perfect. He's such a genius."
I know, like it's such,
way
just
to
such
marry
genius
two
that never-
ideas.
Yeah, well, like we would have never, like us two, idiots over here would
Schmoes.
never have come up with something so clever and smart about this, right? It's like, of course, thank you, you and your wise podcast. It's really interesting to come on and do something like this because we're just like, we're doing wisecracks the whole time, just like trying to make things work and do riffs. And this podcast is very structured and very like well thought out and researched, which is fun. It's very different from what we were doing. So
yeah.
thank you for allowing us to do that. I think it's really funny that like you would listen to our podcast where we're like, yeah, how's about we take all of the money in the world and turn it into mice. and rats?
Yeah.
He's like, these guys would
These
make
guys-
reliable
I think-
storytellers.
I think they could come on and narrate my story. That's a great idea.
these are the guys for the
This
job.
is it. That's wonderful.
Shut up and take my mice.
Shut up. Take my mice.
Thank you so much for coming on. You guys are
it's been
hilarious.
so
You're
fun.
fantastic, and it was great to do the whole episode with you. It was a lot.
It was fun though.
It was a lot of man hours and a lot of voices. A lot of voices that never come up again.
Right.
What are you doing?
They come and they go, but like it makes me really respect what you do here,
Yeah,
because
for sure.
you've done multiple episodes of this. Obviously, we just got through the one.
Yeah, we just got through the one,
And
and,
we're
I'm exhausted.
winded.
I'm
Goodness.
tired. I'm a broken man.
Sweating. Gosh, like how do you manage Tynan?
Well, thank you. Your admiration is very much appreciated. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to start off by let me look at my questions because I can't remember what I wanted to freaking say.
Dude, look.
Okay.
Do ask, look.
So you talked about on your episode, Shut Up and Take My Mice, about Lovecraft in general. I'm just wondering, what are your favorite Lovecraft stories? What do you like about Lovecraft? If there is a certain story, what do you like about it? Derek, I know you loved the Dunwich Horror.
Yeah, I feel like Derek has read more Lovecraft than I actually have sunk my teeth into. I feel like I get pretty basic with I enjoyed the Call of Cthulhu and things like that, right? But I feel like Derek, you've delved way deeper into these ancient awfulness, Eldritch horrors than I have.
I think the greatest thing about H.P. Lovecraft as a whole is not just the individual stories, but how his legacy has created these worlds that people are so obsessed with, right? Like you look at Cthulhu, and most people know who Cthulhu is, but most people haven't read the book. And if you read the book, The Call of Cthulhu, you're like, what? Why did this spawn generation? It's kind of boring.
It's kind of wild.
Honestly,
Cthulhu has become some kind of weird pop culture character. He's actually fairly well known.
He's
with people,
incredibly well known.
But then you come and pull up the name Yog Sothoth, and I'm sorry, who? What's that?
Who's this?
Yeah.
But really, I think that to say I had a favorite is hard. I love the Dunwich Horror. I've really fallen in love with it because there's something about. I mean, as everyone just listened to, there's something about the way the story kind of starts anew halfway through the book. I love that idea, and I love how it's like a news, if you were watching the news now, and you see a bunch of people come on the news and they're telling a story, right? It's crazy because they didn't have that back then. They didn't have Channel 5 whatever news, and then you listen to this story and you're like, oh no, this is just a news broadcast of some town in Kansas, right? But that's why I love this story so much. So,
but yeah, and I think about Eldritch or horror, Lovecraft in general. I really love the simplicity of it almost, where it's just there are these elder ones. There is this world created far beyond our own kind of stuff. And it is so unknowable that to attempt to understand it would drive one to madness. And I think that is such an interesting concept because, obviously Lovecraft is not simplistic whatsoever. But you can simplify it to just that, right? And I love that as a concept because that is terrifying. What is greater than the fear of the unknown? It was literally taken and gave those beings and things that people tried to understand and drove them to these madness and created these horror stories, which I think is really, really neat to me.
It's a lot deeper too than most people would think. Based on there's a big creature with tentacles in the ocean. No, it's a lot deeper than that.
It goes so much further than that.
It's about the craziness of man and what man will do to do these
feeble
things.
minds of man and how how simply you could snap their senses of reality.
That's true. Yes, and I talked with Mason Yates on another episode on this podcast, The Hound. And we talked about that the whole idea of Lovecraft is the unknown.
Yes,
it's
absolutely.
He kind of gave it's like an identity to something unidentifiable. You know?
Yes.
And the world he created. I mean, I don't know if you guys played Bloodborne.
Oh yeah, I have a Dark Souls tattoo actually.
Oh really? That's awesome, man.
It might be one of
planning a
Derek's
Bloodborne tattoo
games.
right here actually.
Yeah, so Bloodborne is one of my favorite games because all of its lore, its environment, its story is just so absolutely unknowable. It's unthinkable.
It is Lovecraft the video game.
Yes,
100%.
yes. It's so terrifying too.
Yes,
because something
and cosmic,
let alone as a game mechanic, but something will happen to your character and you'll die. And you're just what the hell was that?
Yeah. And then you see it later on, and you're starting to understand, but you're not understanding.
Yes.
It really delves
and that's
into
what
that.
I love about Lovecraft too, is we get all these culty chantings and stuff like that, things that it literally looks like a cat walked across the keyboard, right? This craziness that you literally struggle to speak out loud. And I think it is so funny because it is what am I trying to say? It is unknowable in that sense, right? It is all we can collect of it is what we can muster. All of these crazy words, they look insane to us, and even attempting to say that is the closest we can even get to interpreting and trying to understand even a fragment of this madness, this literal unknowable entity, being, cosmos, all of it. So cool.
And then Lovecraft just throws in all those weird words like vigintillions.
Yeah, that's a great word.
A number.
I say that word every day actually. I don't know.
Oh really?
Yeah, I go to the supermarket. Hey, I'd some dang it.
I honestly I can't get him to stop saying it. I'm Derek, it was funny the first time, and now everyone's
I can't even say it right now.
One day you'll get it, Derek.
No, but I want to say one more thing on this before we move on to another topic. One of my favorite parts of the Dunwich Horror is when you find Wilbur's body dead, and it is a masterclass in keeping tension, right?
Yes.
Because you don't truly know if that's Wilbur on the floor. You're like, "Okay, what is this creature?" I know it kind of says it, but it doesn't. Does it really say it? And then the way he reveals that it is actually Wilbur on the floor is like 2 words.
Yeah.
You're like, I just listened to this insanely disturbing, wonderfully written, terrible, like I'm trying to use words because that's what he did. But it's like you said when we were recording, you want it to be mouthy. You want it to be like you're chewing on it. You're like you're digesting it in your mouth, right?
It's all
Or in your
very
ears.
intentional.
Yes. And
Yes.
I just love that. But that I was imagining as we were reading through that, I was imagining being someone in 1890 reading this to their child and like getting scared. Like imagine that though. You're like, oh, I picked this book off the shelf for read to my 14-year-old.
Are you sure, Timmy? You sure you want me to read
Yeah,
this
Mom,
one?
read this to me. And it's a freaking...
We got green eggs and ham. Are you sure you want me to read this one?
But just like imagine that you're listening to that and then you go to sleep and all you can think about are is like those crocodile scales and his tentacle legs and everything. It's creepy.
Yes.
It is still effective at being creepy now. Even if all of the words from the Necronomicon make us laugh really hard, like we're only laughing at it because that's how we're coping with the fact that it is a
Cope
little
with
weird.
things that make you scared by laughing, right? Like that is a huge part of things.
And the fact that H.P. Lovecraft, to some degree, believed in some of the things he was writing kind of makes it a little creepier too, right? Like the fact that the Necronomicon came to him in a dream is one of the creepiest things. Like,
Okay, but Lovecraft was also one of those weird eggs because
crack him open.
again on The Hound, Mason Yates and I. So he wrote The Hound. The Hound was the first story that he introduced the Necronomicon by the Mad Arab, whatever that.
Right.
And he mentions it like once and in passing, and it's like a character thinks of it, and then it's that's it.
so wild. Like something we know is such a huge thing now. It's like, oh yeah, there was this book. Whatever, we'll come back to it.
And for that story, The Hound, he went to a church graveyard and he saw a symbol on a gravestone, and he's like, oh, I like that, and he just carved it off and took it home.
Oh, cool.
And then put it under his pillow to be inspired for a new story.
Wow.
And he had to dream about the Necronomicon. Well, all right. Well, I think our time's done here.
So
I got to go home and make sure.
We're just gonna stop by a graveyard on the way home, right? There's like a
It's
couple,
big
right?
idea, right? We're fine. 300 years from now, they're going to be talking about the blug. The blug. The blug's coming to me in my dreams tonight.
You're daydreaming here. Come on, focus.
Oh, sorry. Oh, I'm sitting on a piece of paper.
But I think I really love about Lovecraft stories, and I think that it's something that is so hard to get right when you put it to something like film, because when you were putting it to film, you were kind of putting a definite image of this unknowable thing, which makes it very hard. I feel like so much of it revolves around the reader's imagination.
Yeah.
And I feel like somehow in the way it was written, it does not even take the wildest imagination for it. It is written in such a way that like your mind cannot comprehend seeing these certain things. So like it fills those gaps very, very easily. And I feel like it works really well in the medium, obviously, that it was written, right? And so like turning it to films and stuff, that's why the Dunwich Horror, the movie, is on our podcast.
Right.
Because they didn't do so great with it, right?
No, and we talked about this in great lengths about converting that medium.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people are scared too as well, because not just because of the fear of it, but also another problem with it, as we were reading again that same section where he dies, where it's describing his body. Think about how many descriptions there are there. Like that's like a good 3 paragraphs of describing one corpse.
Yes.
Imagine trying to get that right in like a practical effects department. Yeah. Like it's impossible. So instead, they just didn't do it at all.
Yeah.
I mean, he was just a normal creepy dude.
Just a guy
He was just
with
a
a
Ted Bundy
mustache.
like. That's it.
Just a guy with a mustache. Well, and since we're on that topic of film, do you have any favorite Lovecraft-based movies? Because I personally like Dagon, and Lovecraft has a short story called Dagon. It has nothing to do with that story. It's actually more based off of...
I got really excited because I haven't seen this. I was like, oh, I love Dagon.
Well, but it's based off of the horror over Innsmouth.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah.
The Shadow over Innsmouth.
Shadow over it. Yeah. So it's a story based on that, and it's more campy. It's more like kind of, I guess you could say, B horror film, but I like it. It's pretty fun. And I learned about it because there's a YouTuber, Meat Canyon, who reviewed it. So, are there any Lovecraft-based films or video games, whatever, Bloodborne, that you guys like?
I mean, we talked about Bloodborne. Bloodborne's a phenomenal video game. It's literally my favorite game of all time.
It's
when you said it, I cried a little bit. But no, a movie I would recommend is Annihilation. Oh, you like it?
Arms up in excitement.
I think 2019 is when that movie came out. And it's one that I'm disappointed is too good for the podcast because I want a space to talk about it.
Sometimes you want this platform we've created to just like rant about the good ones.
That movie, it does really, really well with the unknown. It feels a little bit like The Color Out of Space, but it is its own thing. It's very loosely done from it. Another one I would recommend is Overlord. It's kind of a war movie, but it is very much a Lovecraftian horror movie.
And I'll say every time I watch Annihilation, because I do return to it, and that bear scene.
The bear. I was thinking of
just, oh my God. Oh my God. The bear scares me every time. In fact, actually, Isaac, right now, can you Google naked bears?
No.
I don't. I've been told.
Don't do it.
By my
Google
PR
naked bears.
team that's a bad idea.
Yeah, actually, you should have cleared this with us beforehand. We have to leave now.
We've got to go
legally.
We're going to collect all of the equipment in the room. We'll get it back to you in 3 to 10 business months.
The FBI is actually here. They're here to take me away. The federal bear inspectors. They're asking me to take my shirt off to see if I truly am a bear.
What's weird is they're naked. That's no strange thing.
Oh, that's the federal. Never mind. I'm done.
Listeners, go listen to their episode. Shut Up and Take My Mice. Listen to their other episode where they Google naked bears. Which one is that?
I have no idea.
Oh,
you can't ask us
I think that was
like
the most recent one, right?
That's one of
No, it was a while back.
It was
We had
like
a
one of
short
our
on it.
first shorts that we had made for the podcast.
Yeah, if
That
you
was,
just look
it was
at
like
our shorts on
first or
TikTok.
second one. I'll find it in a second. But for me, my recommendation for Eldritch Media, I've told Derek vehemently he needs to watch this movie. It is called The Void from 2016.
Oh, yeah, you have talked about that movie.
It is a very cool movie where, like, I want to say, I can't remember the exact details of it. I want to say a police officer brings his pregnant wife to this, like, kind of defunct hospital. And while he is there, just very, like, Eldritch cult things start happening. These strange people, like these robes with these like triangles on their faces, start like surrounding the building, keeping them trapped in there. They're starting to like try to use the baby for some kind of ritual, and just the practical effects in that movie are just incredible. Just awful body horror nastiness of like bodies mashing together. There's some awful stuff going on in the basement. Lots of experiment type stuff. Lots of tentacles, cults, all that kind of stuff. All the Eldritch stuff you know and love.
Wow.
It is a wonderful film.
I'm loving this so
That was
far.
from the Bears moment where I accidentally look up on live air. Sorry to spell that out. Do you need to bleep that? I don't know.
Whatever, I'll edit it.
It's from episode 43. It's a wolf drink water world where we watch The Wolf Man.
Yeah, and that
That was a great episode.
tracks.
Yeah, I personally, I love The Wolfman. I love
The new one, the one we watched.
and I like what's his name, the actor in that.
Benicio del Toro.
Pierce Brosnan.
I love
Thank you.
Benicio del Toro.
Tynan.
I don't mind Derek.
I'm
hating.
attacked. I'm being added.
In this episode, it's a wolf drink water world. Derek just could not get on board with Mr. Benicio del Toro.
Listen, his performance was stale.
He thinks he mumbles a lot like this. But I
I
don't
think he was a
say-
Frenchman because it
it
was what would be
worked for
interesting.
me. It was fine. Am I here to praise that performance? Not necessarily, but
You're
it
literally
works
doing that
fine.
right now.
And because of that episode, I actually looked at the werewolf transformation scene of, is it American Werewolf in London?
Oh, gorgeous.
Yeah, incredible, right?
And I compared it to the one in The Wolfman, and like, holy crap, the practical effects
Oh, yes.
off the chart.
Did you then
Really,
go
though.
watch An American Werewolf in Paris?
Stop right there. Stop right there.
I've not seen either
Listeners
one.
at home, do not listen to Derek as he's on his soapbox trying to tell you to go watch an American Werewolf in Paris. It's just not worth it.
Well-
we've got a whole episode about it, and I'll tell you
Well-
why not to watch that movie.
Well-
I don't want to throw around the term bad movie, but don't watch it. That's all I can say about it.
Or
No oars. There's no oars. I'm in a rowboat right now with no oars. I'm waiting around with my hands now.
Hey, that pun that gets an 8 out of 10.
That pun was horrible. I
That
think.
was horrible.
That was amazing. Yes.
Sorry, we riff a lot.
No, that's fine.
I love it.
Should we get into why the title exists that way? Just because I feel like it's interesting radio. That was horrible.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it had derived from a terrible pun that I had made because it's actually weird how it connects. It was because of the Disney's live animated Pinocchio movie that they
hate that
released,
movie.
the one with Tom Hanks in it.
Excuse me?
Yeah,
Just wait.
That's where it comes from, right? So I was over at my family's with Derek and his wife Emily, and we had my family just put that movie on, right? And we're just like, all right, I guess we're gonna sit and watch this now. Derek was appalled.
Worst thing I've ever seen in my life. I've
He
never been
hated
so
it.
scared. Tom Hanks' performance in that movie was dreadful.
Yeah, it's pretty terrifying, not gonna lie. But so hated it so much. Then later on, in the same year, we were looking at like a list of horror movies released that year, and he sends me a screenshot from like the main page of Google. In the middle of all of these horror movies, there is that Pinocchio poster. I don't know who had decided.
What?
It was just someone had deemed that a horror movie, and so Derek's like, "Yeah, it's horrible." And so I said, "Wouldn't you call that horrible?"
No way.
And that was months before the podcast idea had even come through. But it was in that same breath that we were like, that'd be a funny
That'd be a
idea
fun
for a
podcast.
podcast, blah, blah, blah.
And now
so yes, thank you, Tom
year-
Hanks, and
year
your
later-
puppetry foolishness.
Oh, you are kidding.
So that's where that comes from.
That is awesome. Well, getting back to the real world, right?
Oh, yes.
So there are plenty of horrible things, right, in the real world. What kind of like cosmic horrors keep you up at night, or like what kind of things scare you? Because like I saw a video by a guy named Big Tug on YouTube, and he said like, here are some cosmic horrors that keep me up at night. And one of them, I didn't know this, black holes move.
They're terrifying.
They move.
They move.
Don't talk to me, black hole.
They can't.
They move.
No way.
They move. They,
Yeah, they move.
What business do they have moving? Where are they trying to go?
I
Are they
You don't
late
wanna
for
know that
something?
they-
It's a meeting. Everyone's going.
Towards us, away from us, what?
Well, but the thing is, there's a black hole at the center of the universe.
Yeah.
And everything in the universe is
Slowly.
coming there
Slowly.
very slowly, right?
Yes.
Where it's not
Yeah.
going to be in our lifetime or like
Well, it might.
One day.
eons.
It's going to be in someone's lifetime, right? It could be ours.
One day the black hole's gonna get bored and just be like, you know what, fine, zoop, and just suck it all in.
It's going to pack up its bag. It's going to put on a little stick with a little handkerchief on it. It's going to have a couple suns, a little
a
moon.
little hobo bindle.
Yeah. I'm out of here, folks.
Yeah, exactly. But it keeps me up at night, or at least it would, thinking about everything in the universe is being pulled toward this black hole, and at one point, it's all going to get there.
Ugh.
What happens?
If my mom listens to this podcast, she'll have a fit. There's something like talking about like horrors that scare people. My mother does not like the thought. Yeah, my mother is the cosmic horror.
That makes sense, actually.
No, love you, mom. No, she like cannot handle when we talk about the fact that this planet is just sitting here right now.
Oh, yeah, it's
just
freaky.
she's like,
It's
how?
just floating.
What's keeping it there? How's that happening? I don't like that. It could stop at any moment.
Right. Okay, another thing. We know that gravity exists.
Yes.
No idea, like, how it actually works.
Yeah.
Where does it come from?
Where does it go?
Why?
Cotton Eye Joe.
We don't know.
Gravitation Joe.
Gravitation. I agree, dude. The one that gets me every day of my freaking life is when I close my eyes and I'm like, hold on. If my eyes stayed closed right now, I could just fade away, and then I could just be gone.
Oh, goodness.
And then I could just not open my eyes anymore, and then I'm
pretty
just
terrifying.
gone. And then I'm just not back anymore.
You know what
and
gets
then it's
me
people-
on that side of things is like, you know, not to get like incredibly religious here on the podcast, but you know, say there is no kind of life after death kind of thing.
Yeah,
The people what they say is like there is nothing after that. Try to fathom nothing.
That's exactly what I'm
That's
saying.
horrifying,
That's what I
right?
mean.
Well,
Right?
and I also just did the Pit and the Pendulum, and in that one, Poe has the character kind of extrapolate upon that idea of death is different from even dreaming, because dreaming and sleeping is the closest thing that we can relate to death.
Absolutely.
But we still have consciousness.
Yeah.
You know, we can imagine something, we can gain consciousness in a dream, and then we can wake up. So where does consciousness, the idea of an identity and thought, where does that go after we die, right? And it's like maybe that is connected to the idea of the soul.
Yeah.
And it's like that soul goes back into the eternities, and that's all right. So and I feel like that for anyone who isn't religious, maybe can still fathom that kind of question, right? Maybe they're not thinking about God, but they're thinking, where does all of the thoughts, like, it's not my brain. You know, where does the thought of I'm hungry right now, but I want a grilled cheese sandwich, right? Yeah. Hunger comes from the body.
Right.
Grilled cheese sandwich comes from.
Where does that come from?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got really scared of this idea at a young age when I watched, like, I want to say Toy Story 3 or 4. Whichever one, no, I'm going.
No, that makes sense.
Trust me. When I can't remember, it's either 3 or 4. Whichever one has Lotso Huggins Bear in it and they go to like the daycare, that one specifically.
3 did.
Mr. Potato Head removes his eye, but like I think he actually gets all of his body parts ripped out from him and they take his body. And then they stick all of the eyes and the mouth and the arms inside of a tortilla. And he moves and functions and pilots this tortilla. Where does his consciousness lie?
Where is it? Where is his brain? Is it in his eyes?
Scattered between the body parts? Because clearly it's not his plastic potato body.
No, that makes sense.
Where does the potato consciousness lie?
If you took my eyes out and my arms out and my legs out and put them in a tortilla, would then become the tortilla? Is this what's going to happen?
These are the questions, Pixar. I have concerns.
Real talk, there is something in the real world, I forget the company, but it was on Minefield on YouTube.
Okay.
And Michael goes and there's this organization that preserves organs and body parts of people. So they can preserve just your head or your whole body or half your body, whatever.
Yeah.
And the point is to preserve your body until there is a time when you can be what's it called, revived or something like that.
Just like they did with Walt Disney.
Yeah, exactly. So they freeze your head, and then it's like, okay, so don't know when it'll be, 100 years, 200 years, but eventually we're going to wake you up. Yes. Yeah. And that kind of scares me too.
Oh, that's terrifying. It's so scary.
There's a Black Mirror episode where people upload their consciousness to this computer, and it's like that's their paradise forever. And that just kind of scares me because it's like...
That's freaky.
Okay, so you're telling me that I could wake up, but I don't know anything that will have happened or anything. It's like being born again, right?
Yeah.
It's so...
Not born again Christian, but like being born again.
Just born again, period.
Not born again virgin, but...
Yeah, it's like, is it like, do you feel like you've taken a long nap? Or you like, you have no idea of how much time has passed.
Yes.
I think about that for like space travel too, like in Interstellar, right? Like that's That's a scary idea. Like you don't know if you're going to wake up, and if you do, where are you going to be? What age are you going to be?
Like, I know with Matt Damon's character.
With
Matt Damon? You know, he's an actor.
Do you know him?
He's on the ice planet. He's on...
Isn't that Martian? The Martian?
No, he's in Interstellar.
He is in Interstellar.
This movie I'm referencing, can't remember.
He blows up in the movie.
Yeah, I remember now. It's been a minute.
But he falls asleep and doesn't know if he'll ever wake up.
That's very scary.
I'm sorry.
But I think it's really funny, like how every like time travel movie, the first thing someone does when they find another living being, they're like, what year is it? And that sounds so cheesy, but like for you to not have a actual grasp on what that is and to find out you've so much time has passed is like, that's scary.
That's terrifying. And to find out like life moves on without you. Like that's one thing that scares me too. Like, I mean, just about death in general, but life keeps going, right? Life's not ending when you end.
Yeah.
Like, oh gosh. Well, thanks.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have a great time sleeping tonight. Oof.
Well, and that's why so many of us find that itch to leave our mark on the world before we go. You know, we write our names on walls, or we make art, and we provide entertainment. Absolutely. Because who knows? You know, it could influence somebody. And
right. Derek, 30 years down the line, people are going to be looking up naked bears on Google.
What the heck is a naked bear?
They're gonna go into their Mind internet browser on Google that we've uploaded through chips in our brains. And Google naked bear.
They're gonna
Google naked bears, and the first thing that's gonna come up is me.
And one's gonna pop up in front of them like a hologram.
Or if anything, it's going to be like some weird LED contacts. So it's like, so I'm like
I am the naked bear.
It's me. Yeah, it's like VR. You look down at your hands and they get all hairy.
It's gonna be the naked bear from Annihilation, though. So it's gonna be all messed up.
Yeah, it's not what you thought. Yeah, it's not what you wanted.
Help me. Yeah,
that bear was practical.
Terrible.
So about this story, what did you like most about this story? Is it the cosmic horrors? Is it the creatures? Is it the characters? Is it just the idea of the unknown? What was it about this story that you liked most?
I really liked the man attempting to control it and understand it and kind of failing when they were trying to corral it and make it a thing and like try to live with it. You know, the Whateleys in their house, like continuously tearing down walls and building around it, trying to make this thing work for them and like understand it. They think they've got this grasp on it and they perish, you know, they don't make it to that. And it's just like how you mentioned, you know, you really love that there's this twist in the story where like you didn't expect it to go that way.
Yeah.
I really love that, like them really feeling like they had the handle on it and it did not end up going the way that they'd expected, right?
Yeah, and it reminds me of a comparison that people made. It's like, what if Cthulhu is a human and we are ants, right?
Ooh,
and if you walked into your bathroom and all of these ants were on your floor, and at first you'd be like, oh gosh, I got to kill these ants. But then you come back with a broom and they've formed a circle.
Yeah.
And they built a fire, and they're like all chanting your name, like Derek, Isaac, and it's like
I'm gonna watch these ants for a
that
minute.
actually happens every once in a while to me. Have you guys never had that happen?
Like,
Not personally, no.
I want a lot of sugar, and then you're just like, well, all right, here's some sugar.
But then they're going to start fighting because you didn't give it to someone else.
If you give some ants some sugar,
Then one ant is crucifying himself, and you're just like, what is happening?
it's not really what I asked for. But you guys can't really understand me, so like, what am I gonna do?
But then you get in your head, and you're like, hey, you need to drown yourself. See that magnifying glass over there? Go stand under it.
it's totally cool. Don't even worry. Just go look in that bright light for a second. It's gonna be totally fun.
But I think that is a staple of
Fantastic.
Lovecraftian horror, which is that there's this cosmic being that knows and is everything, right? Therefore, it doesn't care and wouldn't care, couldn't care about humanity. But, counter-proposal, if there is a being that knows everything completely and knows, like, you and your existence completely, how could it refuse love to you? Because it's like, no, Derek, I know what he's been through, I know what he's like, I know what he's thinking, I know what he's going to do. Isaac, I know who you're going to meet, I know who you've met, I know where you're going to be. So I feel for you. I have complete empathy for you, and because they can be exactly in your place because they know everything. And I don't know, maybe it's just a choice of what you believe, but I would like to think that it's the other one, that it's the feel-good one, where it's like, how could a being know you so well and not love you? But that's the horror of Lovecraft, is that this thing doesn't care about you.
Right, exactly. What if there is that exact situation there and it doesn't? You know, there's the or side, the negative side of it.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it comes from the unknown, right?
Yeah, because we don't know.
You can make these assumptions all day, all night, right? Like, what if there is something up there that's watching me right now, protecting me, but what if there isn't? Right, and I think it's the half glass, half full.
Enough to drive a man mad.
Oh my goodness! But no, really, it's like that. It's the like, do I look at the glass and it's half empty or half full scenario, right? Do I lay in bed at night thinking, what if, or do I just try and live my life to its fullest potential and not worry about the what if? There's a lot to it. It's scary.
I guess it's a good question of, like, in the eternities of mankind, does my life matter? But then there's also the question of, is that really a good question to ask right now?
But does it matter? Because, like, in 40 years or 10 years or 1 year or one day when I die, right, like, what really does it matter to me? So why not do things that will matter to the people that are with me?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Why not do the things that are going to affect those around me? Or, like, for instance, like, my podcast isn't going to save lives. Our podcast isn't going to change anyone, right?
Well,
but
you never know.
We're at least providing entertainment for the day-to-day, right? That's how I look at it. That's why I do it.
Even for ourselves, if you want to get like
exactly.
super simple about it, you know.
Oh,
like,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me of this. I'm going to describe a meme right now. I know people hate that, but it's the one meme where it's like a bus, and on one side of the bus, someone is looking out the window at like the rock cliff. It's all dark and gloomy. On the other side, someone's looking out at the sunshine. It's all happy, right? And in both of their situations, it says, "I'm going like everyone's going to die," and the other side, everyone's going to die. Like it's like it depends on your perspective there, how you want to look at it, right?
Yeah.
To answer your question, though, my favorite thing about this book, The Dunwich Horror...
Oh, is that the question? We've come so far.
But... Well, I mean, if you like us tangenting, listen to our podcast too, because this is
That's all we got.
it actually changed as we were recording today, because what my favorite thing was coming into this was like the building of the house and the changing of the house and just Wilbur dying halfway through. I really love that. But today I loved that it was from the people's perspective. I loved that this book didn't have a first or second or third person, right? It was just a story that was like a radio broadcast or a news channel broadcast, right? I loved that. And maybe that stemmed from me voicing some characters and being a silly goof off. But like, I really think that that is a great way to make people scared, because you are reading these firsthand accounts. I guarantee someone read Dunwich Horror thinking it was real. I guarantee it happened a lot.
Yeah.
So like, if you're reading these firsthand accounts, you're like, oh shit, Martha, get over here. Check out what happened over at old Dunwich.
That's exactly what happened with War of the Worlds by
Exactly,
Orson
the radio
Welles.
broadcast. Yeah.
Exactly.
So it had to have been happening even back then with books, right? It happens with every medium. I mean, it's still happening to this day. People are saying
It happened with what's the movie? It happened with
James and the Giant Peach.
yeah. People thought that was real.
First movie that gave
I really wanted that Spider Woman to be real, personally.
Blair Witch Project.
Oh yes. I mean, they did it on purpose.
They went deep into doing that to like make that a thing. I saw a video where a guy showed his grandma a video of Grand Theft Auto 5 and she thought it was the news and she believed it and she was so concerned. No,
can't steal cars.
That's terrible. No. So it's saying like people can and will believe these things if you put it in that way, you know, that light. And I think you're right. The firsthand accounts make it a lot more believable. You're not sitting here through the eyes of this protagonist. Because I think that's something about horror. You have to create this likable character. And sometimes they don't do so good at making them likable, but you have to create this character that somebody can root for, somebody can feel for if they're in this situation of peril, right? And I think that's a huge part of it. You know, is like and I think that's where they can go wrong often. You know, is making it about that, centering it around this character, and like missing a lot of the point and what could make it scary.
So then, do you think there's a moral to this story? Because I think with Lovecraft, he didn't care about that.
No. Is there a moral to Lovecraft? No. Besides, man is feeble and weak to these things he cannot and will not understand.
And you can push moral onto anything, right? Yes. That's the joy of enjoying medium, right? You can literally push it onto anything. He didn't care. He was there writing these stories to scare.
I remember in school, I would hate that portion of because I feel like that would always happen when you're at the end of like, you know, you read this big long book and then you're answering these questions for the teacher and all that. And it's like, no, what was the moral of the story? Sometimes I'm like, I didn't care about the moral, or I couldn't find one. I had to like dig to find it. And if that was the case, if this moral did not move me enough, then I didn't want to bother thinking about it, right? Yeah. So sometimes I think, you know, you do not need this moral. Of course, there are great stories with great morals in them, but like, you know, this is not necessarily one that needs it or has, I think, one.
Well, I have no further questions. Do you guys have any further comments on Lovecraft, the story, anything else?
I think you wanted to know where the Tomato Tower was. Yeah. Well, some of it's in left state New York. Oh, crap, I left state New York.
None of it is in downstate New York, that's for sure.
You don't want to talk about the tomatoes down there. They're actually turnips, and they're not even in the tomato family. It's very upsetting. For those of you who don't understand, listen to our podcast. We talk a lot about the Sir Tomato.
Yes, find us talking about Tomato Tower and Mr. Rotten Tomato in all of his works. We do much sillier things that go on this wonderful podcast, but thank you so much for having us in this space.
It's been such a great experience.
The man here is a master of this craft. It is really something to be admired, so please listen to this one, listen to many more. If this is your first, go back and listen to all the other ones, because you must. It is a great time. There's so much, like it humbles me as a podcaster to see the amount of work
content creator
that you put into this, you know, from the music to like, you know, getting all of these materials and condensing them into like a podcastable thing. It's incredible, honestly though. So like, thank you
really good work
for letting us be a part of this. From two podcasters to you, wonderful work. Can't wait to see what else you put out.
And since we're in podcast form, I can give you a gift too. Here's an envelope.
What is that, Derek? I didn't put that in there, Derek.
It's an invitation to come be on our podcast to watch a movie with us. So hopefully we can get you on in the next little while too, and you can come watch a movie with us.
Absolutely. love to so much. Before you guys go, where can people find you on social media for your podcast or for you individually?
Do you have it written down?
Oh goodness, yeah. I have. There's like a little stint that we put at the end of every episode where it's like you can find us at all of these places, and I'm going to tell you right now. Find us on all of our socials. We are at Instagram at that_was_horrible, Twitter at TWH Podcast, Facebook at That Was Horrorble Podcast, YouTube at That Was Horrible, and now even for you youngins out there, we are on TikTok at That Was Horrible.
What's a TikTok?
Make sure it's not horrible, it is horrible. That's the whole nature of the pun. It looks like that wash horrible. So that ThatWashHorrorble. Horrible.
It's like horrible, but with horror.
And I love your intros every time where Derek's like, that was horrible.
Oh, so catchy.
And then the goodbye.
Yeah, wait, can we end with that? Derek, can you give us one of those?
Goodbye.
All right, goodbye, everyone. Thank you so much, guys, for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this 3-part story of the Dunwich Horror. I want to thank Derek and Isaac again for coming onto the podcast. It was a lot of fun to work with them. If you enjoyed this story, then join our subscribers in giving it a good review and subscribe to it on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. And click the bell icon to be notified when a new story goes live. Now, I noticed there was a bit of an upload error on YouTube for part 2. No idea why that happened, but I apologize all the same. And now you can listen to part 2 as well. I believe I fixed the problem. If you'd like to hear any classic horror stories on the podcast, then please email poeshowpod@gmail.com. That's poeshowpod@gmail.com, and give me your suggestions there, or leave them as a comment on the YouTube channel. I'd love to hear them and feature some suggested horror stories on this podcast. Please be sure to also listen to the episode that I joined on That Was Horrorble, number 52, Etui Rat Dad, where we review the murders in the Rue Morgue from 1971. That was a lot of fun. Follow The Poe Show on Instagram and on Threads at The Poe Show Podcast, and on TikTok at Poe Show Podcast to get sneak peeks at new episodes and any other updates. And now, the Dunwich Horror comes to an end. But you'll hear from me again on the next episode of The Poe Show.